Today on Pilot's Discretion, we're joined by Juan Browne from the blancolirio YouTube channel. He talks about researching airplane accidents, fighting fires with the U.S. Forest Service, and flying tail draggers. Pilot's Discretion starts right now. Hi, pilots. I'm John Zimmerman, and thanks for listening to Pilot's Discretion from Sporties. Visit sporties.com/podcast for today's show links and access to our complete archives. And remember, you can send us an email anytime at podcast@sporties.com. Today, I'm excited to have Juan Browne on the show, well known for his very popular YouTube channel, Blancolirio. That's where he does aircraft accident analysis, but with a fact-based and reasoned approach that has won him nearly 500,000 subscribers. He is a former Air Force pilot and a current airline pilot, but he's also logged a lot of time in tail draggers, piston twins, and many other GA airplanes across his long and varied career. Juan, welcome to Pilot's Discretion.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I want to begin with your approach to accident analysis, because there are dozens, maybe hundreds of airplane crash channels on YouTube. But I think you have a unique approach that avoids the clickbait headlines and the wild speculation that I see many other places. So tell us about your process. When an airplane crashes, how do you decide whether to cover it, and what do you start looking at, and how do you approach that?
Well, first of all, if there's no data, there's no story. So we got to have good data. And then there's got to be a lesson learned. Sometimes it feels like I'm repeating this. There's so many similar accidents or similar causes, but there's always a lesson to be learned somewhere in all of this. And of course, I'm always learning too as I'm reviewing this stuff and researching it. So the typical workflow will be like, it can be as quick as one day. In fact, that's the normal flow. So I may see something on the morning news. There might be a breaking aviation story. And then I get into the office here and I start checking my email and messages. If something big's happened, that blows up, emails, messages. So boom, start researching it right away. So I have a couple of main sources I like to start with first, usually the Aviation Safety Network or the Aviation Herald. Those are two great sites that gather a bunch of the data about the accident that I need in order to tell the story. And from there, and this is the thing today, is we've got so much information right at our fingertips, almost in real time, that makes all of this possible, which wasn't otherwise possible in years past. So right away, we'll have in real time ADS-B data, for example. We'll have in real time real ATC audio. We'll often have videos of the incident available as well, and firsthand accounts. All that's readily available right there online almost immediately. So between those sources, if we've got that data, we can put together a story real quickly.
You always say, here's what we know so far. Why is that so far part so important?
Because you don't want to speculate. I mean, instead of speculating, what I'll say is something along the lines of what investigators will be looking for is this, that, or the other thing. So to avoid speculating and to let people know that this is all we know so far.
And why not just wait for the NTSB reports? I see this almost every time, right? There's somebody in the comments that says, well, what are we even doing here? Why don't we just wait for the NTSB to do their thing? So what is your response to that?
That's been the huge hurdle that I've had to overcome in getting this channel up and running, is the ages-long philosophy in aviation to wait for the NTSB final report. Well, as we all know, that's going to take 2 years from now. But today we have all this data. We have it all right there in front of us. We have the same data that the NTSB is going to be looking at. And there is so much to learn right away looking at this data and looking at all the information that we know so far about an accident. So we don't need to wait for 2.5 years. And after everybody's forgotten about it, we need to learn these lessons now, and we need to keep relearning these lessons over and over, it seems.
Yeah, I would also add that there are lots of other people who aren't going to wait for the NTSB report. So we might as well have some reasoned, thoughtful people who have actually flown an airplane producing some content on this, because I sometimes see people who, well, let's wait for the NTSB reports. And all that does is see the conversation to people who don't actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So, for a listener who might be skeptical, explain why you think accident analysis is valuable. Because I occasionally see pilots say, "Oh, why do we obsess about this? And it's negative, and it's a bad look for our industry." And I don't understand why pilots spend so much time talking about and analyzing accidents. So, why do you think it's important?
This is the modern day version of hangar flying. And as we grew up years ago flying, we always hung around the line office, drinking coffee and eating donuts and talking about aviation. And it always wandered into the accident investigation realm of hangar flying. And that's how we pass this tribal knowledge along. And now we've got a whole new generation of pilots that their primary source of information is through video content and online content. And they're not hanging around with the old guys as much at the airport like we used to do. And so this is your modern style or version of hangar flying. And that's why it's so important to be able to pass this knowledge along in this sort of a format.
That's a great way to say it. How'd you get into this? I mean, why'd you start the channel? You're a busy guy doing a lot of flying. Why'd you sit down one day and decide to start a YouTube channel on this?
Okay, so the whole story. I- I'm I reluctantly got into this. This was not my primary idea, purpose, or function. It's since turned into a full-time job for me. So YouTubing just started out goofing around on YouTube and sharing some motorcycle content, motorcycle adventures, that sort of thing. By the way, that's a very tiny market is motorcycling, a very small amount of views, but a loyal followers and great fun. And then the in 2017, the Oroville spillway failed spectacularly here in Northern California. So I took my little GoPro camera up with me in the Luscombe that I had at the time and overflew the situation there at Oroville, then brought that video home and did a little voiceover explaining exactly what was going on, and that video blew up. It went to nearly 500,000 views with thousands of comments and great questions, and I realized, man, I gotta get on this story and keep telling this story, and that suddenly put the channel on the map. So it was the failure of the Oroville spillway that got this channel going. Now, that story went on for 2 years. We've covered it completely from the emergency to the very perilous evacuation, to the recovery and the complete rebuild of the spillway. Then, as that story kind of wound down after 2 years, more and more people started asking about the airplane, the Luscombe that I was using. And then an accident would happen, and people would start asking about this aircraft accident. And initially, I was very reluctant to get into this because I knew, as an airline pilot, that if I got into this, it would have to be exactly right. If I get it wrong, I'm just going to be rolled off the stage immediately. And in order to get it as accurate as I could is going to require a hell of a commitment to do it correctly. So I took a couple stabs at it, and those videos did go well. Again, I had that big barrier to overcome of, why don't we just wait for the final investigation? You're just speculating. But we overcame that, and people are now expecting this information, for me to get this information out in a timely manner as soon as something happens.
I was going to ask you about that. Do you ever feel pressure that when something happens that you've got the clock is ticking and people are waiting for the blancolirio reaction to this?
Yeah, yeah, I do feel that pressure now, and I can't get to all of them, and so I do pick the more pertinent ones. But you need that workflow. You need to keep this thing rolling about 2 to 3 videos per week, just to keep up.
Tell us about the name. Where does blancolirio come from?
Another top 10 questions for the Blancolirio channel. Blancolirio comes from my wife, Jenny. She grew up in Spain. And so she just made that name up late one night in order to get on YouTube when YouTube first became a thing. And then I started posting casual stuff on her channel because I figured, I need to remain anonymous because I'm an airline pilot and they don't know who I am. So I started posting on my Jenny's channel. She just called it Blancolirio, White Lily. And then the Oroville story broke, and then it was too late to change it. I didn't know how to change the name, and now it's become a thing. It's such a unique and odd name that as soon as you type it in to Google, the first thing that comes up is the channel.
It's a very similar story to Sporties. There's about 3 different stories about where that name actually came from, but by the time it took off, it was too late to change it. So we're just going to lean into it now. So another word that I associate with your channel is kablamo. So what is the inspiration for that, and where do you choose to deploy that word?
It started my young son Pete, who's now just turned 13. We would go flying in the airplane, and it would come down to land, and he would grade my landings as a kablamo, he'd call it. And I think he heard me say the term once or twice, and he adopted it very effectively. And so we've been running with that term ever since, kablamo.
Let's talk about some of the lessons learned, because you've now covered a lot of accidents on your channel. You mentioned there's some themes you keep coming back to. So what are those themes? What are the things that stick out, the mistakes that pilots seem to continue to struggle with?
Well, one example is an update I'm finishing up right now on that Honda jet in Mesa, Arizona. When we get to seeing these Part 91 business jet crashes, more often than not, the crashes come from a individual who is a private pilot that's trying to manage and handle his own private jet himself, instead of hiring a professional pilot or crew to fly the jet for him. I've seen a lot better examples out there in Part 91 business, like McFarland, for example. A family that can afford the jet gets the jet, but then hires a professional pilot to manage and fly the jet for him. That's just one example. It, Cirrus crashes in particular, but in general aviation, single engine general aviation, loss of aircraft control, just basic loss of aircraft control in the pattern, stall, spin, things that have been a part of aviation since the beginning of aviation are still very much in the front line. Scud running, continuing to push VFR flight into IMC conditions. The dog rescue fellow in his Mooney just the other week, there was just a classic example of boxing yourself into a situation you can't get out of, stacking the odds against you, too many odds against you, losing sight of how vulnerable we are in a single engine aircraft at night in the mountains, IMC, near icing conditions, in a new aircraft with maybe some new avionics. Aeronautical decision making reasonable decisions. And so many of these accidents are a result of not making reasonable or rational decisions. The Catalina Baron crash, the whole group pressuring themselves into just, it'll be all right. Let's go. Let's charge the battery really quick and get going. And I bet you as soon as they took off on that dark runway with no lights on the runway and that weak or dead battery, as soon as they went to raise that electric gear, I bet you all the lights went out in that cockpit, and they were in a heck of a pickle with the fog right off the end of the runway. Again, aeronautical decision making, this time by a very experienced pilot. So just this is a lot of the same old lessons, but we got to just keep reviewing over and over and over again. Because again, we got this whole new generation of pilots. This is all new to them.
Yeah, I see a lot of these a lack of, I guess it's humility, but a better way to say it might be an unwillingness to see things as they really are. You know, there's a scud running or that Catalina accident. There's sort of a wishful thinking that if I want this bad enough, I'll somehow overcome the laws of nature and physics. And the best pilots I know are able to ruthlessly look at the facts as they actually are, especially when they're not the way you wish they were, and admit that this weather really isn't good enough, or the performance isn't there today, or I personally am not sharp enough as a pilot. And I'm not going to hide from that or pretend it doesn't exist. I'm going to acknowledge that those are the facts.
Yep. And after doing this channel for a few years now, I look back on my own aviation career and realized, man, I was one of those scud running guys and night flying IMC, or not IMC, but night flying in the mountains, single engine. And the stuff I don't do anymore has increased a lot since I've been doing the channel. I'm really a daytime VFR, light wind, only under the most ideal conditions kind of pilot anymore as I get older and older, and especially after a few years of doing this channel.
How about in your day job at the airline? Do you ever think about appearing on your channel before you do something? Do you see echoes flying through it, and do you ever have second thoughts doing that day job?
Well, yeah, I what you can see now after doing this for so long is you can kind of begin to start reading the accident report before the accident happens, and you can start to see the little holes in the Swiss cheese begin to line up, and that allows you to preemptively cut short and break the chain real early. But you can almost joke around about it in the cockpit. You can say, and then the accident pilot did this and put a stop to it right away. So it helps you to see accidents before they happen.
My primary flight instructor always used to say, if you're ever unsure, think how this will read in an NTSB report. And I think many pilots got that advice. Maybe a way to say it for the new generation coming up is if you're ever unsure, think about what Blancolirio would say if he were making a video about this flight, and maybe that gives you some pause.
Kellen's done that. Kellen's done that to me before. We got hydraulic lock in the Waco. We're rushing to go meet a time over target. Do we really want to keep pushing this thing and show up on your own channel?
All right, Juan, let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with some more questions.
Earn all your pilot ratings and keep your flying skills sharp with Sporty's Pilot Training Plus. This all-inclusive membership unlocks Sporty's complete library of award-winning video courses, so you can learn anywhere you have your phone, tablet, or laptop. For one annual fee, you get access to over $1,500 in courses, a smart investment in your flying career. Plus, enjoy free shipping every day of the year at sporties.com and apply for one of our 3 annual flight training scholarships. Learn more at sporties.com/pilot training. Now, back to Pilot's Discretion.
We are back with Juan Browne, who logs time in both Boeing wide bodies and tail draggers, and a lot of other things in between. Juan, I'm always fascinated by pilots like you who have flown in many different aircraft types, many different aircraft operations. So I want to ask what you've learned from some of those experiences. I think I'm right. After the Air Force, you flew for a brief period of time for the U.S. Forest Service, which must have been a unique and dynamic environment. What did you learn doing that?
That was a lifetime worth of adventure packed into 1 year of anus crunching flying. It was a real eye opener. So I grew up here where I live right now in Grass Valley, Northern California, right here on the air tanker base, and we've got a base of 2 S2T air tankers. So, and then got my AMP license, and I went to work with these old guys. We were restoring some of these old air tankers back into warbirds. So I knew the industry very well. In fact, it was some of those old timers that convinced me to go cut my hair and go join Air Force ROTC and get on with the Air Force. So when time came to get out of the active duty Air Force and try to get on with the airlines, well, I got turned down twice by United Airlines and said, oh, this may not work. I'm going to see about getting on with the U.S. Forest Service. And that took a year-long process of getting through the application process with the Forest Service. But I did get on as a lead plane pilot trainee here in Northern California, as it takes at least a full year or more to learn the job as a lead plane pilot. And so I did that for a little over a year. And then finally, the airline called that I'm working at today. And of course, the job of a lead plane pilot is, at the time, it was a single pilot operation where you were leading the tankers in on the drop. So it was similar to being a forward air controller in the military, working in a ground kind of combat situation. And you are basically given the whole air show or a big portion of the air show over a fire, and you work together directly with the air tankers to figure out where you're going to put the retardant that's going to be most effective in helping to slow the spread of this fire. We don't put fires out with air tankers. We only help slow the rate of spread of the fire so that the ground crews can get in there and properly make a containment line around the fire.
And what's the most important skill in that job? I mean, I've got to believe situational awareness is at a maximum, but stick and rudder skills, weather and reading the wind, there's got to be so many things you're balancing there. What did you learn after a season of doing that?
Yeah, it's really, the flying is totally secondary to that job. I mean, that's just got to be natural as can be to you, because you're operating at 150 feet above the vegetation at blue line airspeed, best 120 knots or so, always trying to work downhill from the vegetation. But the most admirable firefighting pilots that I ever met were the folks that started out as ground pounding firefighters. It's the innate knowledge of wildfire behavior that makes a good lead plane pilot or air tanker pilot good at his job. Somebody that knows that firefighting industry from literally from the ground up. In fact, since I had come out of the Air Force, they sent me and a couple other trainees just out onto the fire line to work with some boots on the ground guys, and we had oh man, Lucky guy named Lucky down in the Angeles National Forest. And it was so much fun learning that job from the ground up, and just how incredibly hard work that is, and learning how the whole process and allocation of resources works, and in often cases does not work. And so, yeah, the ground pounding guys really, if you start from the ground up, it's that innate knowledge of the wildfire behavior itself that is what makes you a great lead plane pilot.
So on maybe the other side of the spectrum is what you did in the Air Force, flying C-141s, a little bit larger, a little bit faster, probably a little bit higher often than that. How about that type of flying? What impact did that have on you? Obviously, probably more relatable to airline flying these days, but what are the skills you learned in the Air Force that were particularly valuable?
Let's see, 141 flying, that's another funny story. So I come out of pilot training, they split you up whether you're fighter qualified or not. And so a bunch of us get fighter qualified. And of course, at the time, it was 89, we had one fighter available for that class. And so the general's kid, of course, got that one fighter. So all the rest of us, they said, in my case, particularly said, Brownie, you can talk and fly at the same time. So we got a job for you. And they made us instructor pilots. So we all had to come back as instructor pilots. So that was my first gig, was flying T-37s. But I was able to do a little prisoner swap and come up here to Sacramento and do that out of Mather Air Force Base. Just had a blast doing that. So did that for 3 years and said, okay, I'm ready. Uncle Sam, I'm ready for that big fighter assignment you promised me after doing my duty as an instructor. And he said, congratulations, Brownie, you get your first available choice, a C-141 to Travis. 141, don't look like a fighter at all. And but it was close to home here in Northern California, and it turned out to be a great opportunity to really travel the world. And the thing about a 141 is you come in from as an instructor pilot into the 141, they upgrade you to aircraft commander really quickly, and they upgrade you to air refueling qualified aircraft commander quickly. So in that job, you learn to manage a big crew. It's, you got a crew of 12 or 13 folks, and you're the leader of that crew. And then you're going around the world, wherever the hot spots are in the world, whatever's happening on CNN, and you're some of the first people there. And in some cases, it's kind of like you are a little part of the diplomacy in the local area. And it was just a fantastic, eye-opening global experience. We literally circumnavigated the globe several times in the 141, coming all the way back to Travis, depart over the Sierras and come back over the Golden Gate days or weeks later. But that's a thing called strategic airlift. And much of it involved, it was like hauling all my enlisted guys all around the world from one giant party to the next, because they knew all these ports of call very well. They had a lot more years of experience than I did. And then after I got on with the Forest Service, I was able to secure a job at the Nevada Air National Guard in Reno, Nevada, flying the C-130s, as they'd recently converted from RF-4s. And so we had a bunch of very upset RF-4 fighter pilots, upset that they were transitioning to C-130s. And I was one of the few guys that came with any CRM or crew resource management background. So I had to go listen to a bunch of salty old F-4 guys complain about the transition to the C-130s. But that's where I learned the difference between strategic airlift versus tactical airlift. Boy, I it made me realize what a good job that 141 was, because that was just the strategic airlift. You're just hauling stuff from or people from point A to point B. Tactical airlift, you're doing it all. And you've got a lot of squares to fill to stay current and qualified in the C-130, from low-level navigation, formation, night, low-level formation, low-altitude drops, airdrops, high-altitude airdrops, assault landings, just a whole myriad of requirements to stay current and qualified in the C-130, because it's such a capable airplane. So that's where I learned the difference between tactical airlift versus strategic airlift, and learn the differences between those two jobs. And eventually it looked like, eventually that unit did get the MAFS mission and get into that. And if the airlines weren't going to call, I was just going to roll into a whole career of firefighting with the Forest Service, and then get on with be one of the MAFS guys in the C-130. And that would have been a fascinating career. But eventually I got on with the airlines and been there for 25 years.
So as an airline pilot, you fly the airline during the day and you fly piston airplanes for fun when you aren't flying those jets. Some airline pilots do that, some don't. I know some airline pilots who, when they're done flying, the last thing they want to do is look at an airplane, right? So what's the difference between those two types of airline pilots? Is it the way they came up in their aviation career? Is it just their mental attitude? What do you see the differences between the guys who are leaving the flight deck and running to the piston airplane and the ones who just want to get away from the airport?
Well, that kind of separates the folks that really have the passion for the aviation. A lot of folks get into the airlines because it's a very lucrative job, and so they're in it for the money, and they realize very quickly the difference between the kind of training you can get in general aviation versus the kind of high quality environment that you're operating in the airlines. In the airlines, your window of safety is very small and tight. And in general aviation, boy, Part 91, it's wide open. And so a lot of pilots are reluctant to, and rightfully so, to avoid going back into or getting into general aviation, especially folks that maybe just went straight from the military to the airlines and never had any general aviation experience. If you take an airline pilot and move them into GA, they're just they got their first 300 hours is every bit as hazardous as somebody that's starting from scratch in general aviation, and in fact maybe worse, because they're bringing some different skill sets in there that don't apply. So you got those that grew up in general aviation like myself. I bought my first airplane when I was 15 years old, an old Taylor Craft, and stuck with it. I got that AMP license and always bought and sold airplanes. And part of the idea of getting the airline job for me was to be able to afford to keep messing around with small airplanes in the future. And that's what I'm doing to this day.
Do you find that piston flying, maybe especially the tail dragger flying, does it make you a better airline pilot, or are they just so totally separate that they really never cross?
No, there's definitely some transferable skills that help. Not a whole lot of transferable skills, but the basic stick and rudder hand flying skills are there that you never use in the airlines, especially now on an aircraft like the 777. On a Boeing 777, you'll take off, rotate, take off, climb out, gear up, and pretty quick, autopilot on for the next 15 hours. And then you'll be autopilot on all the way down to the last couple thousand feet or so, but maybe even less, 1,000 feet, a couple hundred feet, or certainly down to minimums if the weather's bad, before you ever click the autopilot off again and begin to hand fly the aircraft. So your eye-hand coordination flying skills definitely atrophies substantially in the airlines, especially if you're flying wide-body international stuff. So keeping your chops up in the GA aircraft really helps keep your chops up in the big airplanes, particularly when it comes to the simulator. Most of your hand flying now in the big airlines is done in the simulator. So when it comes time for that V1 cut and all the different exercises you got to go through in the simulator, a lot of that GA flying really transfers well. In fact, they'll start a sim session now in the airlines. First go is just going to be hand fly this airplane all the way around the pattern, and we'll even turn off the flight directors and just do some basic hand flying. And you, that's when you see how quickly somebody's skills has atrophied over the years. And the GA guy can pick that up really quick.
Okay, Juan, we always end Pilot's Discretion with a lightning round we call Ready to Copy. I'll throw out some questions on a wide variety of topics. You read back with your quick answer. You ready to copy?
Let her rip.
What's the most annoying mistake you see other accident recap channels make? If you're watching another YouTube video and you just sigh inside, what do people do that you wish they wouldn't?
Excessive speculation, and there's a disturbing trend going on right now, just now going on. I've become the victim of artificial intelligence. So they're grabbing our videos now and downloading the text, sending it into Chat GPT, and then overlaying and then making a video just out of stock video footage, and then replaying the whole content of our video using artificial intelligence and an AI voice. That's terribly frustrating. And it's supposed to be announced on YouTube that this is AI content, but they're not doing that. And YouTube is kind of encouraging it. So that's one of my number one frustrations right now. Other than that, people that don't know what they're talking about, that's always, that never works.
What's something you've changed your mind about since you started doing these videos? A procedure or an airplane reputation or something like that you've changed your mind on after doing all these accident recaps?
Man, it's just my personal flying. I'm just a lot more careful in my personal flying. I have changed my ways. I am on the straight and narrow, especially now that I'm kind of high profile. And I realize, almost all of our moves are out there for everybody to see. All your ADS-B data, your ATC, and that sort of thing. So I'm doing proper patterns now. I'm not doing any abbreviated patterns like I used to do. A lot has changed in my personal flying as a result of doing this channel.
Yeah, I know I wrote an article about icing for Airfax, and then about 2 days after that published, I went out and flew a piston airplane with forecast icing. I thought, I better do the right thing here because this is going to be awfully embarrassing if the guy that was just up on a soapbox preaching manages to ball it up with ice in there. So I understand that.
Yep.
Is there one accident that has stuck with you that you keep thinking about?
Not particularly. It's usually the latest one. The latest one will happen, and you mull it over, and you'll go to bed with it and just mull it over, and it's usually the most latest one. Is the one that you're thinking about the most.
What advice would you like to share with YouTube subscribers? So not other creators, but if somebody loves a channel, hopefully Blancolirio, how can they support that creator, give constructive feedback, create a good community? What's your advice that you would like listeners to hear?
Okay, and this is kind of advice for other people that want to get into YouTube and do this sort of thing, is the comment section. You can really support the channel by putting in salient comments or appropriate comments. You got to cultivate the comment section. As soon as I post a video, I got to babysit it for a couple hours because you'll be stormed by trolls. You got to get the trolls off of the comment section right away and not hog the bandwidth. And then that allows the reasonable comments to float up to the top of the comment section. And after a few hours or a day or two, you will get some of the most experienced people that know much more about that particular airplane or that particular accident, or some very important information will begin to surface on the comment section. So taking care of that comment section is very important. And then otherwise, as far as supporting the channel, I've always avoided other sponsorships. I only have the one guy, Jason, on his finer points. I should know he's on my channel every time, that little flag. But other than that, I just promote myself through Patreon, and that's a great way to help support the channel and avoid the vagaries of ad revenue with YouTube, because you can get demonetized for any reason on YouTube, any particular video or the entire channel if you really screw up. You never know when that's going to happen. So if you have something like Patreon where folks can kind of support the channel like a digital tip jar, that really helps make up the vagaries of the YouTube algorithm and ad revenue. And merch. Yeah, Kellen says merch. So Kellen, come here for a sec. So Kellen here, Kellen, the intern here, he's going through his ratings, and he's the IT guy for the channel. And so he said, you got to put some merch up there. And I said, I do not have time to mess with t-shirts and that sort of thing. And I said, you put the merch up and you can take all the proceeds. So that's what he does. He manages the merch. He takes the proceeds and he puts it towards his flying. And he's flying the Husky and the Cub and racked up how many hours now?
530 and climbing. Buy me some avgas. Buy a t-shirt.
All right. What's your most controversial or non-obvious advice for a new airline pilot in 2025? Just been hired, brand new. You just got the uniform. You're showing up to your first day of work at the airline. What should they know beyond the emergency procedures and the SOPs?
Well, I guess as somebody who was hired 25 years ago, all I can say is you have no idea what it's been like the last couple of decades. These new guys, they come on and they are complaining if they have not made captain within a year and a half. And I got to tell you, son, I was on reserve as a first officer for over 17 years. And so the pace of upgrading through the career can vary wildly, and they have no idea of what that's like when a black swan event happens in an airline career and how quickly your fortunes can change. So I recommend living under half of your income. The possibility of a disability, I went through the prostate cancer thing there and got on a medical leave. You are forced to live on less than half of your pay. So I try to enlighten them to the way things went in my career, which so far is nothing like what they're seeing in their career. They are just zooming straight to the top, and they've all got great contracts now, making great money. So don't get divorced and live on half of your pay.
Give us a stat about the 141 that would blow our minds. It's a giant airplane. Many people have seen them over the years. What's an amazing stat you remember?
The 141 is louder on the inside of the aircraft. It is louder than the front row of a 2 Live Crew concert. You will go absolutely deaf inside of that thing. And it's got a pretty serious Dutch roll to it. And some aircraft are worse than others. And so if you sit in that thing rocking and rolling and one that's got a pretty good Dutch roll for 12 hours, it takes you a better part of a half a day to get your land legs back on when you get on the ground.
What's more fun to fly, a Waco or a Husky?
Well, it depends on the mission. If you want to go backcountry flying in Idaho, you're going to take the Husky. The neat thing about the Waco, and the Waco is fun to fly, but it's a big old heavy blind airplane. It's a bit of work to fly that thing. So the best thing for the Waco is to share the passion of aviation with other people. You can put 2 people in the front seat and they can have an amazing ride in an open cockpit airplane, and smiles for days after that ride. And they've got a true taste of the passion of aviation in getting that Waco ride.
I'm going to go a little bit outside aviation here. What is the best flavor milkshake at the field station in Oregon?
Huckleberry. Yeah, if they've got Huckleberry, you got to get Huckleberry.
I know you fly to Sydney, Australia a lot. So what's your favorite place? So if I'm headed to Sydney, a tourist site, a restaurant, a place to walk, where should I check out in Sydney?
The first thing to do is, if you're at the hotel, the layover hotel where we are, is just go to the restaurant right to the left of the entrance to the hotel, a little Vietnamese place right there where all the local construction guys are eating, and dive in there and get your pork chops and eggs for breakfast, lunch deal. And then go up to Portico, I think it's called, a coffee shop for your latte. Those are the 2 top recommendations right away there.
Outstanding tips. What's the best place to ride a motorcycle in Northern California, Tahoe area? If I'm up around you, where should I go?
Well, we've got a fantastic single track. We've got a world-class single track trail system outside of Downeyville. So Downeyville, California, which is also famous a mountain biking mecca. So we've got mixed use trails that allow both the use of the mountain bikes and the dirt bikes. And it is just spectacular, world class. Some of those trails are quite hairy and expert size trails on the single track. And then for dual sport riding all through the higher Sierras, when the weather allows it, is just top notch.
All right, our last question is always the same on Pilot's Discretion. You have one final flight. We want to know, what are you flying and where are you going?
One final flight, like that's the last flight I could ever go and do.
This is it, and you get to pick the airplane and the destination.
I bet you in the end, I'd just be happy to do one hop around the patch in a J3 Cub on a perfectly still evening right here at the hometown airport.
Juan, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Pilot's Discretion, brought to you by Sporties, training and equipping pilots worldwide for over 60 years. For more episodes and today's show links, visit sporties.com/podcast. I'm John Zimmerman. We'll see you next time on Pilot's Discretion.